Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Saturday, July 30th, 2022, and today we are going to be talking about Mandela Barnes, the lieutenant governor from the state of Wisconsin, and the Senate race that has emerged as now with him as the frontrunner, one of the last remaining Democrats in the race, the most prominent Democrat remaining in the race, as three of his opposing contenders decide to drop out of the race and endorse him. Over the past week, Mandela Barnes has gone from a position where his primary was very, very competitive to a point where he may not end up winning it. And now he has been endorsed by quite literally his biggest opponents, with seemingly clearing the field in favor of one Democrat to emphasize the unification and the push behind Barnes for the U.S. Senate. Now, the state of Wisconsin has been closely targeted by the GOP and the Democratic Party as one of the most competitive Senate races this election cycle, and that comes as a result of President Biden winning the state in 2020 by just 0.6%. For reference, Donald Trump won Wisconsin in 2016 by 0.7%. This state has gone back and forth, and in 2016, they elected a Republican senator, re-elected at that, Senator Ron Johnson, who is up for re-election this year, and also in 2018, re-elected a Democratic senator by about 10 points across the state. So Wisconsin, depending on the midterm year or national environment, has gone in different directions on the presidential level, on the local level, on the statewide level, and it's very interesting to see because now we're heading into a Senate race that is expected to be at least somewhat competitive at the state. The Wisconsin Senate race is a toss-up according to Politico, but realistically speaking, it does lean in favor of the GOP. Looking at my own predictions over the past months, Wisconsin hasn't gone to the Democratic Party since August of last year. The last time you can actually see it blue was with a tilt Democrat characterization, and even then it was a stretch to call it tilt Democrat, knowing where we are right now. Beyond that, as we continued to move through the months and months and months, it became very solidly, at least not so solid enough so that it's a safe red state, but pretty much in the Republican column for quite some time. Wisconsin was a state that hasn't really moved out of favor from the Republican Party and probably won't for the foreseeable future. It has remained a toss-up, but it is very notable to see what actually happened in the Democratic primary here and why this is significant enough because it does change the trajectory of the race, at least slightly. To give you a bit of background as to what was happening in the Wisconsin Senate race, the Democratic primary had remained pretty competitive over the past couple of months. You can see here in February and then and then April and then June, these numbers here never really showed a super significant frontrunner when it came down to the top contenders. What you had here was, I believe his name is Tom Nelson. He was one of the first names to announce that he was running in 2022. Sarah Godlewski, Alex Lasry, and then also Mandela Barnes, the lieutenant governor across the state. What you found in these polls is that Barnes did have a lead of 10 points, 3 points, 4 points, but these aren't super significant leads, and depending on the polls, sometimes it was within the margin of error, enough so that the poll was wrong. Looking at the lead here, it wasn't that significant. Alex Lasry came behind with 13%, then 16%, then 21%, and looked like he was on track to potentially defeating Mandela Barnes when it came down to the eventual election. When you take a look at the graphical summary from Wikipedia, you're starting to see that rise for Alex Lasry really start to pick up pace to a point where maybe it was attainable for the candidates against Mandela Barnes. But then came what nobody was really expecting across the state, and then Tom Nelson decided to withdraw from the race and then endorsed Mandela Barnes. That was an automatic 5%, and it became very clear that there was one nominee that at least another candidate had won it. Then Alex Lasry decided to drop from the race and endorsed Mandela Barnes. Then it came between a two-way race, and then the final candidate, the notable candidate at that, dropped out of the race and endorsed Mandela Barnes. This race that was expected to be very competitive on the Democratic side, where it was going to possibly end up in a position where the Democratic Party was fractured, simply did not come to fruition. This idea, this want from the GOP that the Democrats would be remaining infighting over the next month simply isn't going to happen and won't happen. And as a result now, Mandela Barnes is easily going to win his primary and face off against Ron Johnson in the November election. On the Republican side, there isn't any competitiveness when it comes down to it. Now, Ron Johnson originally was not going to run for Senate. He had declared in 2016 that should he win re-election then, he would not run for re-election. He made that to a promise to his constituents, said that he was not going to run. And for a while, it didn't look like Ron Johnson was going to run. You take a look at his campaign website from a year ago, it was still stuck on the 2016 campaign website. Donald Trump endorsed Ron Johnson before Ron Johnson even made a decision that he was going to be running, because he very much did not want to remain in the U.S. Senate. He had said privately and practically publicly that retirement was what he was leaning towards. But with pressure from Mitch McConnell and other top Republicans, they knew that an incumbent would help, especially in a state like Wisconsin, with the possibility of a worse Republican being nominated. I'm sure Republicans are really happy they made this choice, seeing the likes of Blake Masters, Dr. Oz, Eric Greitens. But looking at Ron Johnson in Wisconsin, he was never originally going to run. So there were so many other Republicans that were considering that, hey, I might decide to run for Senate. I might decide to enter into this race. And they said, nope, Ron Johnson's going to run. And now it's a race between Ron Johnson and Mandela Barnes. Now, Democrats, I can't say, are exactly going to be in the best position with Mandela Barnes as the nominee. And that's not to say that other Democrats that were running were going to be more electable, just that Wisconsin doesn't seem to be too inclined right now to vote for the Democratic Party. Out of all of the states that we've seen as swing/competitive, Wisconsin hasn't really changed that much. Yes, the chance at victory for the GOP has decreased over the past months, but it's not super significant. You're talking a high point of 77% for the GOP down to 68%. Not nearly as significant as the change in Pennsylvania, Arizona, Nevada, Georgia. Those changes are very, very significant. And the forecasted vote share here is that Mandela Barnes loses by about 4 points statewide. That checks out. In 2016, the Republicans won this race. I believe Ron Johnson won by about 3.4% or maybe 3.7%, one of those two, but still was able to win across the state of Wisconsin, despite many of the forecasters and the polls saying that he wasn't going to win. The Senate race in Wisconsin actually got so bad from the perception of the Republican Party in 2016 that there were considerations that money was going to be withdrawn from support for Ron Johnson, that this race was going to be a lost cause. By election day, you had about an 83% chance that the former senator, Russ Feingold, would be winning this race against Ron Johnson, and he ended up losing by over 3 points. It was an embarrassment to the Democratic Party, and it showed that Ron Johnson, despite being a very unpopular senator, is able to overcome practically any obstacle the Democratic Party throws his way, and that likely includes Mandela Barnes. When you take a look at the Senate race heading into the general election in terms of polling, Mandela Barnes only takes a lead in the very few polls that we have by 2 points and then ties in another. This race has been very competitive from the very beginning. When you take a look at polls against other candidates, some of them lose to Ron Johnson by larger margins or just altogether lose their race. There hasn't been much data, and it's really hard to gauge the trajectory of the race, but we can sort of handle the default characterization that Wisconsin is going to lean red, especially considering how close it was in the last election with a Republican incumbent. Remind yourself, Donald Trump won the state of Wisconsin by 0.7, yet Trump won by 0.7. Johnson was able to win by over 3 points, meaning that he's outperformed President Trump once, and there is practically a near guarantee that he does it again. Because if he doesn't, that means that Mandela Barnes wins the election. Now, with this dropping out of the race, it really seems to be a huge change in trajectory in the Democratic primary, meaning that we are fully into the campaign season for the general election. But I don't know if that's really going to be able to boost Mandela Barnes the way that this narrowing of the race was supposed to. The way that this was supposed to go was that it was going to allow the Democrats to focus their efforts on the general election without having to worry about a primary or continuing to fight amongst each other. Because when you attack each other from the internal side of the party, you start to become unpopular within your party. Take a look at Dr. Oz, for instance, in Pennsylvania. Had he ran unopposed, I think his favorability rating numbers would have been slightly higher. I don't think he would have been the most popular figure, but I can't imagine that if he ran unopposed, he would be at a 35% approval across the state when about over 40% are willing to vote for him. That just simply doesn't make much sense. And when you take a look at non-competitive primaries, historically speaking, you typically don't find that much hatred or pushback against some nominees, even if they are unpopular among some other groups. For instance, Hillary Clinton, before she was running fully against Bernie Sanders in a close race, because at one point, Bernie Sanders was only getting 3-4% of the vote, Hillary Clinton's approval ratings in some polls were in the high 60s. During the entire time of her being Secretary of State, her approval rating sometimes even hit the mid-70s. And looking at that and then comparing it to the numbers after the Democratic, decrease in approval, but you can't say that much of this criticism from the Democratic side would have been able to harm her reputation amongst Democrats had it came from a Republican, because it was coming from the likes of Bernie Sanders or Martin O'Malley or Lincoln Chafee or whoever it might be, even other Democrats that weren't even running for president that were attacking Hillary Clinton to promote Bernie Sanders or another presidential campaign. That's not to say that they are at fault either. It's just more to say that when you get attacked from your own internal party, it doesn't help you because you are losing your own core base. That's what this was meant to prevent. This was meant to prevent Mandela Barnes becoming the unpopular, reluctant Democratic nominee that would win the popular vote in the primary with what is on average here about 35% of the vote. Someone who just about 1 in 3 voters decided to go ahead and support. And by the end of it, what you found was that nobody was really thrilled about their candidate, besides that 1/3 decided to vote for him. Now, with this clearing of the field, we know who the nominees are going to be, but the clearing of the field didn't exactly change the chances at victory for Mandela Barnes. You would have expected this to have some type of beneficial effect now that there isn't going to be an expected fractured Democratic Party, but we actually aren't seeing that. Now, to be fair, we aren't getting much data out of the state. It could be truly going in a different direction. But if we're looking at it from an honest perspective too, when you have the polling data from the state of Wisconsin in the 2020 election, which we can actually probably go ahead and pull up. Let me go ahead and try to do a little bit of a working around here around 538. Let's head over to the approval polls. Then we can go ahead and see. Maybe we can get the generic ballot through this. Let's see how we're going to go ahead and jump around here. Probably have to head over to politics. That's what I typically do. Politics and then generic congressional vote right here. Do voters want Democrats or Republicans for Congress? You take a look at the state of Wisconsin in the last election, 2020 cycle, and you find that on average, the polls were wrong. Looking at the state, they overwhelmingly expected that Biden would win by 8.4%. You know, practically every single poll said this. And what had happened was that Joe Biden ended up winning by 0.7. Look at that difference there. Almost 8 points off in a state that was supposed to be perfectly predicted. Almost every single one had the Democrats ahead. And looking at some of the most recent ones, you had an A-plus poll that showed Biden ahead by 11. You had an A-plus B poll showing Biden ahead by 13. There was an A-plus poll that was done by the Washington Post right before the election, ABC News A-plus, that showed Biden ahead by 17. What is the result? Democrats are ahead by 2 points. Honestly speaking, the GOP is ahead by 6. I don't think the result will be 6 by the end of it. I do think that this will be at least within 5 points. But being on a 4 to 5 point scale in favor of Ron Johnson, I wouldn't be that surprised. This race has become one of the more unwinnable ones for the Democratic Party, and while they definitely are still going to target it and spend a lot of money on the race, and while Mandela Barnes probably is one of the better nominees that Wisconsin Democrats have put up in the past in terms of electability, the year just simply isn't it. If this was a blue wave year, I think Mandela Barnes would be able to win this election. Not super easily because he's a non-incumbent, but still do very well. This is a neutral year like 2020. It's possible that he could have won, but no guarantees because Russ Feingold wasn't able to. But then again, Feingold was a repeat nominee, and we've seen how unsuccessful those candidates have been in previous elections. But right now, I wouldn't be confident if I was a Senate Democrat looking at this race. Mandela Barnes has been the now declared presumptive nominee, but that doesn't mean he's the presumptive winner. This race is becoming more competitive, but realistically speaking, Republicans are likely going to win. The ratings here just simply don't make much sense for the Democratic Party, and I honestly wouldn't argue that Democrats are going to be the favorites to win the state of Wisconsin. The last time I was able to say that, at least confidently, was in August, and after that, I really haven't seen much hope for Democrats in the state, and a lot of it does come around the fact that Ron Johnson decided to run for re-election. Again, he might be unpopular. Again, he might be in a position where you don't believe that he's able to defy the odds. But he did it in 2010 and did it again by a pretty significant margin in 2016, despite practically everyone saying that he was going to lose. So this November, I think that we are going to be right in estimating that Ron Johnson is going to win his election. Just previous polling numbers, previous data is all seeming to tell me right now that one of the closest states from the 2020 election is going to go to the GOP. I think this is one of the few states where we're actually going to see this red wave in full effect. And honestly speaking, I wouldn't be surprised if at some point it ended up becoming a 6 to 7 point race if it continues as its current trajectory is saying. Now, Wisconsin could go back to the Democratic Party. I wouldn't be super shocked, but I definitely would be surprised. I think this is a state where I'm not really expecting much for the Democratic Party, and most Democrats shouldn't expect much either, but it also isn't completely out of the question should Democrats end up winning it. Looking at past elections, Democrats have won in the state of Wisconsin. Looking at 2018, again, Tammy Baldwin won by 11. Looking at 2012, Democrats won in Wisconsin by 6 points. Looking at 2006, the state of Wisconsin, it was pretty solid for the Democrats, won by 37.8. 2004, Democrats won the Senate seat that is currently held by Ron Johnson by 11.2%. So historically speaking, there have been opportunities for Democrats to win. You take a look at 2010, Wisconsin went red by 4.8. 2016, it narrows down to 3.4. 2022 might narrow down again. But as it stands, the GOP is more than likely going to win, even with the race completely cleared for Mandela Barnes. Wisconsin Democrats have clearly spoken, and it's very clear which nominee the Democrats want and which the top candidates that decided to drop out want as well. But it also could be, still something that doesn't exactly benefit Mandela Barnes that much for the general election than if he just went through a traditional primary process. Yes, the clearing the field makes it easier to focus on the general election, but it's still a state that is more than likely going to go red than blue, and it becomes very difficult to see how Mandela Barnes becomes the next senator from the state of Wisconsin. But if he does, it also wouldn't be super shocking because he has about a 1 in 3 chance of victory according to 538, but that still puts him in the minority, unfortunately, for the Democratic Party. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, and then a playlist for my 2022 Senate election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all later today.